They're saying how they've been doing experiments on prisoners in the States for the last, 40 years or something, about that.
The video begins without warning. No title, no music, just a sudden shaky frame. The camera is held in someone's hands, and those hands are trembling. The room is dim. The blinds are shut tight, cutting the daylight into thin, pale lines across the wall. The air feels thick, almost heavy enough to touch. And then, you hear it. A slow, steady breath, and a voice. A man's voice. Calm, deliberate, but carrying something you can't quite define at first. Not anger exactly, not sadness, but a strange mixture of both. That man was Ricky Rodriguez, and what you are watching are his last recorded moments alive. To understand why this piece of footage would go on to be considered one of the most disturbing ever found, you have to know the story behind it, and the story begins decades earlier, in a place that called itself the Children of God. Ricky Rodriguez was born in 1975 into what outsiders thought was a loving, spiritual community. In reality, it was a closed, controlling group. Its leader, David Berg, a man the followers called Moses David, preached a warped, dangerous doctrine disguised as religion. Members were cut off from the outside world, forced to live by Berg's twisted rules. Rules that demanded absolute loyalty, total obedience, and something far darker. Ricky wasn't just another child in this group. He was the adopted son of Berg's partner, Karen Zerbe, the woman who would later lead the movement after Berg's death. From the moment he was old enough to walk, Ricky was treated as a child of prophecy.
In this home video, Rodriguez laid out his plan to murder Smith, as revenge, he said, for years of sexual abuse he suffered growing up in the family.
A symbol the group could parade in their publications, photographs, and videos to prove that their family was pure and happy. But behind the smiling photographs and carefully staged gatherings was horror. The Children of God practiced what they called spiritual love, but in reality this was a cover for deeply harmful behavior. Children, including Ricky, were forced into situations no child should ever experience. They were told it was God's will, that it was love, and that speaking out would be betraying God himself. Every moment of Ricky's childhood was under their control. He wasn't allowed a normal education. He wasn't allowed to explore the outside world. His only reality was the one the group created for him, and that reality was built on lies and fear. The control was so widespread it was openly documented in the group's materials. They filmed and photographed children, including Ricky, for training and recruitment. What the outside world would have seen as disturbing evidence, the group saw as holy work.
I remember a time when we both were alive.
His sister, who spoke at the memorial, says she too was abused in the cult.
Raising us as kids like that, in that sort of environment, that abusive environment, was very wrong, and this is a sad, sad end result.
By the time Ricky reached his teenage years, something inside him began to change. The stories he'd been told since birth didn't add up anymore. The truth he'd been forced to believe felt like a lie. He began to question his so-called parents, his so-called family, and with every question came more anger, more confusion, and a growing desire to get out. Escaping a cult isn't like walking out the front door. There are no locks on the gates, but the bars are in your mind.
In the wake of the murder-suicide, other children of the family are coming forward with their own stories of abuse.
The fear is so deeply rooted that even thinking about leaving feels dangerous. But somehow, Ricky found the courage. By his 20s, he had left the group. But what he found outside wasn't freedom. Not really. He had no real family, no stable job, and no sense of how the real world worked. The scars, both physical and emotional, were permanent. For years, Ricky tried to live a normal life. He got married, made friends, even tried to forget. But the past wouldn't let go. Every night the memories came back. Every day the anger grew, and at the center of it all was his mother, Karen Zerbe, the woman who had not only allowed his suffering but helped design the system that enabled it. Ricky began speaking out. He gave interviews, talked to other survivors, and told his story online. He wanted justice, but no one from the cult leadership was ever arrested. No one went to prison. They were untouchable, hidden, protected, free, and that broke something inside him.
They're calling on current leaders of the family, which still operates as a worldwide missionary group, to publicly name the perpetrator.
January 8th, 2005. Ricky sits in a small apartment in Arizona. The blinds are closed. The table is bare except for a handgun and a camera. He presses record. At first, the footage feels like a personal diary. He talks about his childhood, about the pain, about the lies. His voice never cracks, never raises. He doesn't shout. Instead, his tone is almost matter of fact, which somehow makes it even worse. These people, they've taken everything from me, he says. They took my childhood, my family, my life, and I'm going to take something back. The camera watches as Ricky picks up the gun. He checks the magazine, slides it back into place. There's no hesitation in his movements, no shaking. It's the calm of a man who has already made his decision. He explains his plan. He is going to confront one of the people who hurt him, a former high-ranking member of the group named Angela Smith. She had been close to Karen Zerby, and in Ricky's eyes, she was just as guilty as the rest. This isn't about rage, he says quietly. It's about justice. It's about making sure they feel at least a fraction of what we felt.
Smith was Ricky's nanny as a child and a longtime member of a controversial sex cult called The Family.
Hours later, according to police reports, Ricky lured Angela to his apartment. The details of what happened next are disturbing. At some point, he attacked her and Angela did not survive. Ricky didn't run. He got into his car, drove out into the desert, and parked on the side of a quiet road. There, with the camera still rolling, he ended his own life with a single gunshot.
On January 8th, Rodriguez stabbed Angela Smith to death in the Arizona desert and later shot himself in the head.
When police recovered the footage, they realized they were holding not just evidence of a crime, but a man's final testimony. It was more than a confession. It was an unfiltered document of years of trauma, pain, and a descent into despair. Watching the tape is unsettling in a way that's hard to describe.
By all accounts, 29-year-old Ricky Rodriguez was a gentle, kind young man. A man remembered at an emotional memorial service on Mission Bay today by friends, family, and his widow.
There's no screaming, no wild emotions, just the steady, controlled voice of a man who had lived through something unspeakable and had decided there was only one way to end it. For many who saw the recovered footage, the most haunting thing wasn't the violence. It was the calm. It was the way Ricky spoke as if he were already gone before he ever pulled the trigger. It was the way he described the pain in detail, but without a single tear.
In his heart, he had chosen a path that no one could share with him. But at the end of the day, he knew I loved him.
In the years since, Ricky's story has been debated endlessly. Some see him as a victim driven to the edge by a lifetime of abuse. Others see him as a murderer who crossed a line that can't be excused. But no matter how you see him, his final video remains one of the most disturbing examples of real found footage in history. Because it isn't just a story about one man's revenge. It's a story about what happens when a child grows up in darkness, is told its light, and finally sees the truth too late. And the worst part is knowing there are still people out there, living in that same darkness. Right now. The city of Barrie, Ontario. A quiet Canadian community where autumn leaves drift lazily across empty sidewalks and the air smells faintly of wood smoke. It's the kind of place where neighbors wave to each other, where people feel safe, where horror feels like something that happens somewhere else. But on the afternoon of October 4th, 2006, the blinds of a small apartment stayed closed. Behind those blinds was a crime that would haunt Canada forever. Her name was Frances Elaine Campione, and in just a few hours she would transform from a struggling mother to the killer of her own 2 little girls. Frances had always been the quiet one. Born in the 1970s, raised in Ontario, she grew up shy, reserved, rarely raising her voice. But like many, she had dreams. A husband who would love her, children she could protect, a family that felt safe and unbreakable. When she met Leo Campione, she thought she'd found exactly that. He was charming, confident, and made her feel seen. They married quickly, and soon, their daughters were born. Serena, the eldest, a bright-eyed, curious 3-year-old, and Sophia, the youngest, barely a year old, with a laugh that could light up a room. To the outside world, they looked like a happy family, but inside their home, cracks began to form.
Hi Serena, it's August 8th, 2006. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday Serena.
Arguments turned into shouting. Shouting turned into slammed doors. The police were called more than once, and Frances began to change. She struggled with severe anxiety and depression. At times, doctors suspected deeper mental illness. She became paranoid, convinced that Leo, the man she once trusted, was a threat. Whether those fears were rooted in truth or shaped by her own unraveling mind, no one could say for certain. By 2005, the marriage was over, and what followed was war. The custody battle over Serena and Sophia became all-consuming. Every court date left Frances more exhausted, more fearful. She told friends and family she was terrified Leo would get the girls, that he would take them away from her forever. As the months passed, she became isolated. Conversations with her grew darker. She spoke about the custody fight as if it were life or death, and in her mind, it was. Then came that October day. The air was crisp outside, neighbors left for work, children walked to school. In Frances's apartment, the world seemed still. She dressed the girls in their pajamas, brushed their hair. Maybe she read them a story. Maybe they watched cartoons. These details are lost to time. What's certain is that at some point, a thought crossed Frances's mind. A thought that once formed would not let go. In her own words, she believed she was protecting them from a life without her, protecting them from their father. Police believe she took them one by one into the bathroom. She filled the tub with water, and there, she drowned them. Serena, just 3 years old. Sophia, only 1. Afterwards, she carried their small bodies to her bed. She laid them side by side. She placed their favorite stuffed animals next to them, as if tucking them in for one final sleep. And then, she sat in the silence. But she didn't call 911. She called her lawyer. When police finally arrived, they found her calm. Almost too calm. She did not resist. She did not cry. She simply told them it was over.
You've been charged with, now you understand that you've been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder?
Yes, I
Okay.
understand what you're saying.
To her, it was an act of love. To everyone else, it was murder. News of the crime spread fast. The faces of Serena and Sophia, smiling, full of life, were suddenly everywhere, and the public could not understand.
And the charges are for murder in regards to both of your children. Okay?
Trial, her defense claimed she had been in the grip of severe mental illness, that she'd suffered a psychotic break. Psychiatrists described her paranoia, her history of breakdowns, the delusions that had built up over months. The prosecution told another story, that she was driven not by illness alone, but by spite, that she wanted to punish her ex-husband in the most devastating way possible. They showed the jury photographs, transcripts, and the haunting details of how she placed her daughter's bodies. In the courtroom, Leo Campione sat in silence, his life shattered. Witnesses spoke, experts argued, years of legal proceedings dragged on, until finally, in 2010, the verdict came. Guilty. 2 counts of first-degree murder.
And so at what point did you understand that you were charged with murder?
She didn't say I was charged with murder. She said I was being charged.
You were being charged.
The sentence: life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The harshest penalty Canada could give. But for Leo, there was no real justice. At a memorial service, he said quietly, "They were my life, and I will never see them grow." Today, Frances Elaine Campione remains in prison. Serena and Sophia are buried together, side by side, just as their mother placed them on that last day. And the apartment in Barrie where it happened is just another building now. People pass by without knowing the horror that once unfolded there. But for those who do remember, they can still picture it. The blinds drawn tight, the October sunlight unable to break through, and the unbearable silence that followed. Because sometimes, the most disturbing monsters are not strangers in the dark, but the people we trust the most. It was a quiet night in Saanich, British Columbia. The kind of night where the world feels still, almost peaceful. But behind the walls of a small apartment, a tragedy was unfolding. one that would shake an entire community and leave investigators with haunting images in their minds for years to come. Her name was Kayla Janine Mayle. She was 34 years old, a former competitive figure skater turned university student, and by all accounts, a devoted mother to her young daughter, Charlotte. Friends and family described her as intelligent, kind, and perhaps a little fragile. She had been struggling, for years, with severe depression and anxiety. On the surface, it seemed manageable. But beneath the mask, something darker was brewing. Kayla's relationship with her ex-husband had been turbulent. They'd met several years earlier, fallen in love quickly, and just as quickly, the cracks began to show. Arguments became frequent, words turned sharp, and when Charlotte was born, those tensions didn't dissolve, they deepened. By 2015, the marriage was over. The two were embroiled in a bitter custody battle, a legal tug-of-war that was eating Kayla alive from the inside. Court hearings, lawyers, the relentless pressure of defending her right to be a full-time mother. It was all too much. Friends noticed her mood swings becoming sharper, her posts online taking a darker tone, but no one could have predicted what would come next. On the night of September 16, 2015, Kayla sat alone at her desk. Charlotte had been put to bed hours earlier, her little girl asleep under a blanket with her favorite stuffed toy. Kayla opened her laptop and began to type. What she wrote would later be called a suicide letter, but it was so much more than that. It was a confession, an explanation, and a farewell, all in one. It wasn't addressed to just one person. She sent it to multiple people, her ex-husband, his family, some friends, and every word dripped with pain, bitterness, and finality. She accused her ex of emotional abuse. She claimed she couldn't bear the thought of losing Charlotte to him. And then, in chilling detail, she explained that she would take Charlotte with her so that they could both be at peace. There was no ambiguity, no hidden meaning. It was clear, and it was horrifying. Later in court, prosecutors would read sections of that letter aloud. The words would hang in the air like smoke, suffocating everyone in the room. According to the investigation, after sending the letter, Kayla gave Charlotte a lethal dose of a prescription medication, a sedative strong enough to stop a child's breathing. The little girl never woke up. Afterwards, Kayla took the same medication herself. She lay down beside her daughter, closed her eyes, and waited. But Kayla did not die. Hours later, a family member, alarmed by the disturbing email, contacted police. Officers arrived at the apartment and forced their way inside. What they found would stay with them forever. Kayla, barely conscious, and the lifeless body of Charlotte, still warm, lying in bed. There was no struggle, no signs of violence, just silence, and the overwhelming smell of prescription drugs. Kayla was rushed to the hospital. Charlotte was declared dead at the scene. In the following days, detectives pieced together the timeline. They spoke to family, friends, neighbors, anyone who had seen Kayla in the days leading up to the tragedy. What they learned painted a picture of a woman spiraling into despair. She had been attending therapy, yes, but she was also stockpiling medication. The custody battle had intensified, and in her mind, there was no way out. The suicide letter became the most damning piece of evidence. Every sentence seemed to confirm intent. This wasn't a moment of impulsive rage, it was planned, it was deliberate. The community of Saanich was stunned. News outlets reported it as a murder-suicide attempt. But for those who knew Kayla, the idea that she could harm her own daughter was impossible to comprehend. Kayla was charged with first-degree murder. Her defense team argued that she was in the midst of a severe mental health crisis, that she believed she was acting in Charlotte's best interest. They pushed for a verdict of not criminally responsible due to mental disorder. The prosecution, however, focused on the evidence, the letter, the dosage of the medication, the fact that she had researched the drug beforehand. These were not the actions of someone who didn't understand the consequences. This was premeditated. Throughout the trial, Kayla sat quietly, often looking down at the floor. When the suicide letter was read aloud, her face remained expressionless, but witnesses claimed they saw her hands tremble. The courtroom was filled with tension. Family members of both Kayla and her ex-husband attended, sitting on opposite sides. Every detail of Charlotte's short life was laid bare. Photos of her smiling, laughing, playing in the park, contrasted with the cold clinical autopsy reports. And then came the verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Kayla was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. For many, the case became a painful reminder of the hidden dangers of untreated mental illness, and of how custody battles can push fragile people to the brink. but it also raised unsettling questions about motive. Was Kayla's act truly born of desperation? Or was it an act of vengeance against her ex-husband disguised as mercy? Even in prison, Kayla maintained that she loved her daughter more than anything in the world, and that she simply couldn't let her grow up in what she believed was a toxic environment. To the public, however, that reasoning was hollow. Nothing could justify what she had done. The suicide letter was preserved in the court archives, a haunting testament to the moment when Kayla crossed the line between pain and destruction. Investigators who worked the case say they still think about it, about the stillness in that bedroom, the eerie calm that followed the violence. It's easy to imagine that night, the faint hum of a streetlight outside, the quiet ticking of a clock, Kayla sitting in the dim glow of her laptop screen, typing words she knew would be her last, and somewhere in the next room, her daughter asleep, unaware that her life was about to end. Those final moments, though never captured on video, exist in the mind like found footage, a scene you wish you could look away from but can't, the kind of moment that replays in nightmares, because sometimes, the most disturbing found footage isn't a tape you can hold in your hands, it's the mental image left behind, the one that plays over and over, long after the case is closed.